So moving on to our next session, that is panel discussion, I would like to invite our moderators, Dr. Dr. Santosh G. Honavara, Dr. Partha Biswas, Dr. Chitra. I would request the moderators to please switch on the camera and unmute the mic. We also have our panelists for this session, that is Dr. Mahipal Sachdev, Dr. Lalit Verma, Dr. S. Natarajan, Dr. Namrata Sharma, Dr.
Hello.
Rajesh Sinha, Dr. Arup Chakravarti, Dr. Chaitra Jayade, and Dr. Arora. I request the panelists as well to please switch on the camera and unmute the mic. Thank you so much. Over to the moderators.
And Dr. Rashmin Gandhi.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much. This is going to be a very informal panel discussion. This is actually an idea given by the residents or postgraduates themselves that they should have a session on teaching and training in times of COVID-19 because it's been a very difficult 1.5 years for all of us, and we have gone through a lot. And what we have come out is with resilience. But what is suffered in the bargain is teaching and training of the residents. So this is going to be a set of questions which some of the youngsters have given me, and I'm just throwing these questions at you, hoping for an answer. This is for Mahipal sir. What do you think are the challenges to teaching and training during times of COVID-19, according to you?
I think there are the challenges and there is the opportunity. I think the opportunity that was there is to go to the entire wide world to learn, and that is didactic teaching. So that I think is something that has been exploited to the hilt, and I think AIOS has also played a very important role in that. And those who were really interested have been able to get international speakers, national speakers from across to listen to them. The biggest casualty that has been there is on patient care and on also in government hospitals, the ophthalmic residents being posted in COVID hospitals. So therefore, that has been obviously there is nothing that can replace actual hands-on training. Elective surgeries got postponed. They were not allowed to do elective surgeries, etc. The clinical skill set training, etc., has been really a very, very big challenge that has been there. And those who could adapt from that particular point was to actually go on to the wet labs to do the animal eyes, etc. But on top of that, I think the anxiety factor was also pretty much, which has played on psychology of several of these young guys who are coming, and the extension of their time period for their MD, MS, and DNB, and the exams going helter-skelter as to the senior residency or the faculty interviews and those. So there has been a hit on the entire career graph of certain people, and this is actually turned out to be a null year for a lot of people. How they make up on the lost opportunity for the skill development is anybody's guess, but unfortunately that has been a very big casualty for stemming out of COVID. Academic didactic, I think, is something that could be easily covered, but the skill set, so there is nothing that can replace yourself under supervision, doing the surgeries and moving step by step in the both in the diagnostics as also in the surgical setup. Unfortunately, they will have to catch up. And one thing that is there is that there has been a backlog and the patients have come back. So I think they should, with all the vengeance, I would say, go back to the OR, to the diagnostic rooms, etc., and pick up the skills which they have so badly missed during the COVID times.
Thank you, sir. Does this list complete, the set of problems, or do you have anything else to add to it?
No, I think we think alike. Everything has gone. So after fellowship, you can see even getting full-time jobs, etc., has been hit. But this is obviously the thing: low patient contact, no surgical exposure, delayed exams. I think it sums up everything.
Does anybody else have anything to add to it?
Santosh, only thing I would say that is it's very surprising that your list is absolutely complete, but somehow for some reason all over the country the fellowship duration has not been extended. To whatever I think, some people I talked to and I found that when they were getting lower surgical exposure, when they had lesser patient contact, and when COVID was hitting them hard, and they didn't, and those people did not have a COVID and were not working in a government hospital where it was not converted to a COVID hospital. Ideally, the fellowship should have been extended, but they were not.
But
Let's
they have
just
also
check it.
reduced the number of slots. I think intakes have been pushed.
No, so for people who are already doing a fellowship program, it's for them. Ideally, if they had a 2-year fellowship or a 1-year fellowship, if it was extended by 3 months so that they could cover up on their logbook appropriate amount of surgical exposure, because invariably what happens is fellowship comes towards the end of their session.
No, I think I will just like to add one thing here. As far as fellowships is concerned, I completely agree with Ajay. Probably these have not been extended, but in some of the government hospitals, the tenures have been extended. Like instance for RP Center only, they have extended by 3 months and then by 3 months more, like that. So in some of the government places, the tenures have been extended, but of course that cannot take care of, or cannot cover up for what has already been lost.
Namrata, like my own son, he's doing his MS training. So they have had extension of their residency because they've been posted in the COVID ward. And in fact, some of them have taken it positively. They're saying that we are getting exposed to medicine, which we would have otherwise not got exposed to it. So there's many of them are taking it very positive.
I would agree with Ajay actually. I mean, in fact, I know a couple of youngsters who completed their MS, but they have been given senior residency without MS certificate so that they can continue the COVID duty. So that is the only purpose, and they don't have any exposure as such to surgical patients or OP patients, just COVID duty. And
yeah, because the NEET exam has not been done.
Not
so
been
they
done,
need
so-
hands. They need hands. Yeah.
No, some of them have taken the exam. They have passed the exam. But still certificates are not at hand.
No, although the junior residents of first year who were supposed to join after the NEET exams, the NEET has not occurred, so they will not join. So they have to have force to be available to do the duties, and if they don't have hands, how will they have to do this because the country needs them.
Nati, you had something to say?
Yeah, no, I even during the OC meeting last year, when the exams are postponed and total lockdown, people are asking questions. I think all institutes should think about having something like a rehabilitation post-COVID program where these people who didn't have any surgical experience should be taken for 3 months as a short term or whatever. I don't know what the term to give. Even I don't know what to do because I don't have turnover to give her. That's why I've got luckily only one fellow at this time. So she takes all the load. But later when the patients are going to increase, and I think we should have some short-term program where whoever wants to brush their knowledge or skills, hands-on skills should be given by the respective institutes, which is going to be a problem, particularly like institute like AIIMS or government institute, but at least private institute like MyPal, ours, and maybe Agrawal's and any other. I mean, all private institutes should think of training their own people who didn't get a chance to operate. I think we should make a new short-term fellowship. And I don't know how we can do that. I don't have it. But I think we should do something because it's our duty to train them as good doctors, good surgeons.
Okay. So you all suggest that fellowship duration should be increased and their lack of surgical expertise should be somehow filled in?
Not increase, they already finished and got a certificate.
Okay. So
But I think they come back again for a sharpening the skill. Like Stephen Covey says, even if you're a good surgeon, you have to go. And I remember Rakesh Sinha mentioning that even you're a great surgeon after 30 years, he says he calls some senior surgeon to the OT and he asks him to come on, tell me what is that you find something I can improve. So I think sharpening the skill. Here there's no skill, they can develop the skill.
Tosh,
yes, sir.
all of us agree that surgical training is one thing. Education has picked up theoretical classroom training and webinars. But surgical skill acquisition has, like Ajay was saying. But what I was, thinking is, can we do something from AIUS? Can the leadership write to them, or we can have a surgical training center at AIS headquarters or whatever. What I'm saying is, what is the role of AIUS in this? Can leadership write to those teachers or mentors that just like Government of India did, so kindly write to them so that they can consider what Ajay was saying to increase the duration by till the time you see logbook जैसा होता है ना भाई 25 surgeries हो गया वो हुआ कि नहीं हुआ, so we can play advocacy role here.
The KSOS actually is exactly planning on a similar venture. I think it is termed as the member mentorship program. A team is being formed, and it is going to be very confidential, an open group with very confidential contents. So whenever youngsters who are in need of surgical exposure or whatever problems they encounter, they negotiate through, and everything will be discussed with the mentors. And that have been this is actually happening in KSOS.
I would
just like to add one thing here that at this point of time we do talk a lot about lack of surgical skill, etc. But I think we should take this time and use it for improving their basic skills, like basic refraction or a basic clinical method, slit lamp evaluation or examination technique. I mean, we may not have all sorts of patients, but the basic skills can be sharpened at this point of time, can be used. And maybe surgical skill, because for surgical training, in any case, you cannot extend it for a very long period. Like for almost more than 1.5 years, things have been, like that. So, and you don't know how long it will be like that. So you cannot extend it for an indefinite period. What we can do is that at this point of time, their basic skill training can definitely be, emphasized and can be, looked after so that they are good in that. And then of course, surgical training, there are so many fellowships they can, once they get a degree or whatever, obviously they will go for some surgical fellowship once the situation improves. But the basic skill is also something which is very important. Basic examination skill, refraction skill, and indirect ophthalmoscopy, etc.
No, I was just saying that there are societies and other societies apart from ophthalmology who do a very nice mentor-mentee program. So I think All India Ophthalmological Society can do a mentor-mentee program. And I know of Women Ophthalmic Society who have, done this mentor-mentee program already on an exchange basis. This can be done when the times are good. Of course, it cannot be done now. And when the times are good, it can always be taken up. Of course, they do need the fellowship. They do need a completion certificate. They do need a stamp. But this, as an extended, you can say, program or an extended thought, can be taken up to enhance their surgical skills. We did have a proposal of a Surgical Skill Development Center at the AIOS headquarters itself. And we were talking to 3 companies about it, and we were nearly there. Even the map for the area was located. The map for the surgical center was also made. The various stations were also made. But because of the COVID, the sponsorship was not there because obviously there was no money. So I think that is something which can be taken up once the COVID gets over. Because the patients are not going to go anyway. We've all seen that once the COVID is over, the patients exponentially rise. People have done, almost double or 1.5 times the amount of surgeries they were doing earlier in the interim period when it was a non-COVID short interval. So the patients are not going anywhere. They are going to be there. And so are the people who are being trained going to be there. The only thing is that we have to probably do this one-to-one connect between a mentor and a mentee on a short term, or you say whatever that can be fixed up short-term basis, so that they have some hands-on exposure.
Great. So let's step back a little and then ask Rashmin, how do you think we can continue didactic training? So what is currently happening is that there are didactic lessons, classes, etc., but they're totally random. There is no scheme. But AIOS and of course, we have a nationwide curriculum. ICU has a curriculum. Do you think all these didactics should be organized in the form of some organized effort so that we follow a curriculum systematically?
Yeah, I think so. I think because there is so much of knowledge, but there is no structure to it. So if we form a platform, so there's I remember a day during the last lockdown where on the same topic there were 3 lectures or 3 webinars going on during the week. So I don't think they gain so much out of this random knowledge, especially the postgraduate students. So if you can form a year-long program and which has a structure to it, which finishes whatever they require to know, at least on the theoretical aspect, that will surely help. In fact, that's what when we were discussing among our neuro-ophthalmology circle, a lot of international faculty consented to be part of our effort to make sure that neuro-ophthalmology is taught here, because they really enjoyed it. So I'm sure that would be the way forward.
I think iFocus has come to fill in that requirement quite a bit. We are following the AIOS curriculum, and then we are going very organized twice a week. So of course, there are regional programs as well. Many of the state societies are also conducting and filling these gaps.
So in fact, can
AIOS already has a curriculum in place, which is the curriculum for, AIOS already has a curriculum in place.
That's right. I was talking about national curriculum, which means AIOS curriculum.
Yeah. So it is already there in place. It is already made. The only thing is that in a more organized fashion, we need to, go through it.
So can I say something here? So, when all these YouTube videos and everything was not there, then we used to study from our books. We had a planned way of reading. You read different things from different books, and, there's a structured learning. What I have learned during this past 1.5 years, how important YouTube has become. And actually from the youngsters, it seems that they are able to pick up a lot of things. But as Rashmin said, if an iFocus, I think, fills in that gap beautifully well. So if this is available in an indexed form somewhere, where you can have, if I'm studying and I'm a first year PG, I need to cover up all these things. And I know this is a resource which is available to me in an index form, and there are 2-3 resources. Nowadays, it's just left to the PG to look at the YouTube, find out the best possible videos, possibly waste a little time here and there to find out which is the best. If you can give them a little structured program, which is sort of recommended by the AIOS, it will really help them a lot.
So that's what we are trying to do. We are archiving all this, and it follows the curriculum from the basics to third year, what is required. So I think that's going to be useful. So Chaitra, would you favor a mass online teaching as we do, or small online interactive groups? Mass is where it is one way you teach, and then there are students who are remotely learning on Facebook Live or YouTube Live, and they can ask questions, but that will only be on the chat. Otherwise, small interactive groups are like 20-30 people getting on Zoom or some such similar platform and having a oral discussion face to face.
I would prefer a small online interactive group, so because I think you have more of a one-on-one connection here, and not everybody has the same wavelength. There are some people who are slow learners, some of them grasp very fast. With the mass online teaching, I'm not really sure whether that will happen, in real time. Maybe somebody will have a question to ask and you may not get a response immediately. Whereas if it is a one-on-one small group, I think a more focused group would be worthwhile. Then again, whether this is for DNBs or whether it's fellowship, it will change, because again, the requirement is very different. If it's fellowship, obviously, again, a small online group would be very, very useful. For DNBs, maybe mass online.
Arup, what do you feel?
So for DNB, a mass online would still work because the curriculum is very, very fixed. Whereas for fellowship, it varies so much from one institute, what they teach and what equipment or what instrumentation they have is very different from another. So you can't, make it so generalized as you could for a DNB or an MS program. So I feel for fellowships, again, small, but overall, I prefer a more one-on-one, small group, because at least then you can understand, even as a teacher, what is lacking, where you want to push one person as against another, which that you'll never know with the mass teaching.
Arup, any thoughts on this?
I think, both these techniques will go hand in hand. I would agree with Chaitra when she says that, you can't have the same strategy for, postgraduate teaching and fellowship teaching. So I think for postgraduate teaching, because there is so much of variability at different universities, different colleges, we need to have both. We need to have a mass online teaching, and then that has to be followed up by focused groups where you invite the students who are interested in joining those groups, and there is a timeline. So I think in this situation, both these methods will go hand in hand. On the other hand, for fellowship, I think what I would agree with Chaitra, that it has to be focused interactive groups, small groups.
So I just want to add one point on extending the fellowships. I think that is a little, difficult, because what happens is we all have limited number of seats. Even though DNB has extended it by about a couple of months, we also have DNB residents. They are going to be not, the entire group is going to pass out eventually, and they are going to want to join fellowships. So the longer we extend our fellowships, we'll be denying the next group of them, opportunity to join. And if you ask me, some of the fellows are actually happy that the consultants have it less easy clinically, because we're able to teach them with more patience. We have more time. We're more slow in the approach of teaching them. Initially, it was like, we just need to finish it quickly, whether it is surgery or our OPD. Now we have so much more time that clinical, training, they feel is much better, because I was just asking my fellows. They said we may be doing less surgeries, we may be seeing less patients, but the quality is definitely better of the training. So there are two sides to it. So I just thought I'll add this perspective.
I think that's what you're talking about. How do we optimize clinical teaching? Since we have less patient volume and slightly more time, what are the measures that we would want to take to optimize clinical teaching? Any thoughts on this? Anyone else? Rajesh, Namrata, Ajay? Yeah, Chaitra.
So since I'm speaking, so what has now happened is that we're getting more time to give them wet lab training and simulator training, which consultants would never go, before. We never had the time. So we're actually now going with them and sitting at the simulator. And in fact, actually, it's so much, nice to do it with them. It's more like a competition, like, I can feel the membrane better on the simulator versus you. It's nice because it gives you a score at the end of it. And it's nice to see that the fellows are scoring better, whether it's because of their gaming skills, I don't know, because the simulator uses a lot of those skills as well. So this is giving us a lot of time. It's not necessarily patient oriented only, but they are also happy with the simulator and the wet lab training that we're able to give.
Can I say something?
Yeah, good.
So, Chaitra, people, the fellows and PGs who are there in your institute are privileged as compared to a lot of other institutes where they don't have those simulators, where they may not have a wet lab. And here, I think AIOS, if it goes on a national program of setting up wet labs all over the country, identifying good hospitals where wet labs can be established in collaboration with, say, Alcon or whatever it may be, it can become a good teaching place. Not only that those private institutions or government institutions are going to benefit, but all over the country, if you can divide it in such a way in different zones and have it, and increase the number of wet labs, it really helps people.
Rashmin, any thoughts?
No, I think I agree with both Dr. Ajay and Chaitra that, and most important issue is the skill transfer, as we have been discussing. I mean, the didactic and theory part have been covered and would be covered even online. But how do you make an incision in cataract, to how do you check pupil properly so that you pick up the subtle signs? I think that's what something which has to be transferred, and that a clinical training only can impart. The YouTube or the discussion would not impart it. So,
next question is, how do we make up for the lost time in surgical skills? I think some part of it was discussed already. Nati, do you want to say something about it? How do you make up for lost time as far as surgical skill training is concerned? Apart from having them come back for skill enhancement, is there any way of making up?
That's why I think the patient's load have to increase. And I agree with Chaitra for doing something. And I remember my resident said they are also using the tomato part to have the hand-eye coordination with the microscope in the wet lab. So I think they have to keep sharpening the skill. And I think there is a thing called mirror neuron, where I wrote a chapter. I think it's there in the also in the book Mastery, Concise Mastery, where Leonardo da Vinci doesn't make any notes. He just sees the picture and has a photographic memory and comes back and some other memory is gone. So I think it can be developed even though you're not operating. So I think one is to assist and keep seeing how you will do it on your own in the mind. And that's what is there, like you do something in the mind before and you do surgery next day. So I think when they come back for fellowship, I think we have enough number of patients to operate, within definitely with a mentor. So I think that's what we have to think of rehabilitating them.
Anyone else? Rajesh, Namrata?
You see, Santosh, can I?
Yes, sir, please.
You see, everything depends on how much time we spend with them. So even if you see patients are less, so what I would do is that ultimately I am a firm believer of logbook kind of training, that a person has to have 25, say, SICS done or 25 VRs done. So till such time patients built up, because a lot of training is done on charity, on a charitable patients. But what I do is small steps. You sit on the assistant scope and let him sit. Small steps will keep giving him confidence. Like in PR, I can tell, muscle hooking or making ports. Small steps. So even in your VIP patients also you can do that because they are not so detrimental for the outcome. So steps which are not very detrimental, you can start giving them so that at least he keeps learning and he's involved. And that eagerness is always there. He's always motivated. And then whenever opportunity comes or a simpler case comes, you ask him to proceed till the time he can. And ultimately, like second part is that how do you make up? Make up for the lost time is spend more time. Either increase the duration of per day or increase the time. So that's what you have to do.
Rashmin, you wanted to say something?
I think the other part, let's say, for example, the postgraduate students who are completing this month, that means they would have lost 1.5 years of the training where they would have learned the cataracts. We have to also see that during this 1.5 years, hardly any camps have taken place. That means there is a backlog waiting there to be operated upon. So even the institutions who do these charitable surgeries would have a huge number of patients coming in as soon as this wave goes away, hopefully this year. So I'm sure they would also require people to help them and take care of the load. So if there is a system by which at least these people who have passed out without much of a surgical exposure can be called back to taken care of the initial 1 or 2 months of the load, I'm sure that would balance it a little bit. Of course, no substitute for a 1-year gradual training, but at least they will have some kind of hands-on.
What is the word of wet labs? Yeah, Ajay, you were saying something.
Yeah, the only, what Rashmin said is quite appropriate, but the only problem is that camps at this point of time are banned by the government. So even if tomorrow they want to have the camps, I think AOS can have the advocacy once we are a little more clear about COVID, that we could allow camps to happen within a particular structured manner so that the COVID is not there, because there are people who need camp surgery. There are residents who need these patients so that the camp surgeries occur. So the surgical training goes on, but who is going to bell the cat? So if AOS can come up with a structured thing and tell the government, look, camps can be done, this is how it should be going. We should not say no, camps are banned. Then it becomes very difficult.
What are the thoughts on wet labs? Yeah, Chaitra.
So as far as camps go, just to complete that, we were also not allowed to conduct camps. But what we're doing is there are a lot of patients who are coming in who cannot afford premium surgeries, who cannot afford the whole package that we have for a normal patient. So we're actually categorizing them under the camp quota. So that is going for our training currently also. Though we are not holding public camps, we are using these kind of patients who are coming in for training, who are obviously not charged for any of the procedures or for the lens. We are putting them under the camp quota. As far as the surgical wet lab goes, I think it is still okay as far as antrus segment goes. We've been able to do quite a lot of work as far as cataract and cornea procedures goes. But for retina, it remains a challenge because we don't have, it's difficult to get a vitrectomy machine in a surgical wet lab. Whereas for be it keratoplasties or whether it is even cataract, we've been looking at different techniques on how to help them, and the residents seem quite happy with the amount of exposure they've been able to get through wet labs.
But for a resident, I think most of the surgeries that a resident needs to learn can be practiced on a wet lab situation. So, Arup, what do you think about it? And wet labs are not expensive. They're easy to establish and maintain. Just needs a small space and I think motivation.
I mean, the consumables are not much, sir, but for a retina, I think it is expensive, but others are quite easy to do.
No, but Chaitra, the simulator which you have on that and ERM peeling and all that can be done, but that's not available with, in the whole country, there are about 4 machines now available.
Don't know. We have this ISI one. We have this.
Yeah, ISI, I think Arvind has, you have, JIPMA has recently got it, and then we have it in AIMS probably. So I don't think any other institution has it.
UFS Delhi has it. All right.
Okay.
So what do you think about simulators? How many of you have used it, and do you think they're ideal surgical tools, training tools?
I have used it myself. Like I told you, during the lockdown, I had enough time to go with the fellows, and I have only used the poster, segment of it. So I think the biggest way it helps them is to get depth perception. Because I have seen people who have not used the simulator and come and done vitrectomy. They don't know how, posterior to go, where to place their vitrectomy machine. Even when they go with the forceps, they don't know, they're so uncomfortable about it. But the minute they've done this actually gives them a perception of how deep they can go. So that is one thing, and also teaches them dexterity, sir, because, most of us are right-handed. So I keep telling them here to interchange the instruments, do the laser with the left hand, because not every time you can do endo laser with the right hand only. So that is 2 aspects I felt that it has definitely helped them. One is depth perception and, ambidextrous, how to be comfortable with your left hand as well.
Yes,
sorry.
Good.
No, and also the nasal bridge. Because with retina, we need to do a little more manipulation from the nasal bridge. That is, with this mannequin, it is kind of helped them because they realize that they can't maneuver it as much when it's towards the nasal bridge compared to the temporal side.
Okay, Alex, why don't we start ARUS, wet lab, and simulator centers?
We are in the process. I don't know why it lagged behind. Namrata has to answer this. But apart from depth perception, I think it's the hand-eye coordination, which is very, very important. Where to keep the illuminator, and so that you are not working in the dark, and all the foot pedal positions. You see, these things are taken very lightly. I would go a step ahead what Chaitra says. We all agree this helps, depth perception and hand-eye coordination. But if I have a batch of, say, 10 people, I would mark them. You see, it should not be taken so lightly. Like, this fellow has performed better than this. So this has to be taken seriously. For them to, graduate to a real human eye, just because they are not human eyes, people take it very lightly. So whosoever is coaching or teaching them, he should, evaluate and mark them or incentivize or whatever. Ultimately, this is one of the best tools in COVID times to, spend time and learn this, especially in VR surgery. This hand-eye coordination, depth perception, nasal bridge, how much to enter, where to place your illuminator, how to check, they're very, very important and can be exploited.
Yes, sir, but I think Dr. Santosh was asking why we have not explored probably. One thing is it's exorbitant and it's a very sensitive device. Sir. The minute you use the probe a little roughly, it gets bent. And each of those parts that you need to replace are very, very expensive. And the second most important thing is the upgrade itself is again expensive because you run out of modules. They have multiple modules there, ERM peeling, then there's endo laser, and you need to constantly upgrade it because after a certain point, the fellows are so good at it, they get 100 on 100. So they learn the trick so well that they get good scores once they do it. But initially, of course, they start off with 10 on 100, 20 on 100, and then they graduate to 100.
And then they love to get 100 on 100 every time because it's almost like a video game.
Yeah. Arup, are you familiar with this SICS simulator made by IC, which is less expensive, and the cataract
No, I am really not familiar with that. But as far as this is concerned, I think not many postgraduates or fellows who can have access to these gadgets, these simulators, because I think there are only limited number of these pieces in the country. It is good to have it, but even if you don't have this thing, what you discussed earlier in terms of wet lab, it can be improvised. There are a lot of YouTube videos I have seen in this COVID time. Very simple improvisation, innovation, and you get a very good hands-on experience. But of course, if this is available, then of course there is, it definitely aids in the learning process.
Santosh, I actually requested them because that the guy from China had come and told, and then Akshay and Ashish are part of that Help Me See, right? That's what you are talking, simulator.
Help Me See SICS simulator, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I think it works well. The problem is during COVID, they are not allowing because of the international rules. They don't want people to come there, I believe. So I told them, why not you do something online? So I returned to them a few days back only saying that you should do some online program to expose that this program is available for the postgraduates, so that it will be useful.
Yes, sir. The paradox is most of the institutes which possess this gadget, they already have a surplus of surgical material, teaching material, number of patients for the postgraduate teaching fellowship program. So I think, but the bulk majority of the postgraduates in the other medical colleges, other institutes who do not have access to adequate number of surgical cases, they are the people who will really benefit from an exposure. And if AIOS can help them, to help, to set up some kind of a training cell or teaching cell, and in turns, people from different medical colleges can come for spend maybe about a week or so. I think that will be a great advantage.
I'm happy, and you are perseverant. So you approved Aditya Jyoth Fellow. No?
Nati is in another webinar now. Nati is speaking in another webinar.
Nati, mute yourself.
Nati, mute yourself. You are in another. Admin, can you mute Nati, please?
You would have muted us, ma'am. He can't hear us.
No, Chaitra, this is what I was saying. It's Dr. Arun's idea is very good. And what we had planned earlier with the National Surgical Skill Development Center was 5 other zonal centers in the 5 different zones.
I just called Dr. Natarajan.
So admin mute Dr. Natarajan. So there's nobody from the audiovisual side, audiovisual team?
Admin.
So we should wave at Dr. Natarajan.
Not seen in the chat.
Can we please have hall coordinator? Please have Dr. Natarajan muted.
Yeah, just a second.
Okay.
He's on mute now.
Yeah. So this was actually the idea. We would have 1 central one and 5 in the zones to begin with, and it's a very good idea. And that was, in fact, we'd even identified in the various zones, but of course, because of COVID, it didn't happen. Another article that I would like for all of you to go through is the one we published just recently last week in Survey of Ophthalmology on teaching and training tools in the COVID times. And it doesn't have these big simulators, but it has just simple tricks and tips. And Dr. Amar Pujari has done a great job on it, along with our it's done purely by the senior residents of all our subspecialties on how they have trained and what models. They've come out with new models, and they are very inexpensive models to how to train themselves in various surgical skills. And all you probably need is just a microscope and nothing else, and maybe ancillary things, like a latex glove, etc., even squint surgeries, how to insert muscles, how to put them back again on models, on animal models otherwise. So I think that's a very useful resource, and everybody should have a look at it.
Alternative material like fruits and fox leather and all that, right?
Yeah. So it does, I'm not saying, but it just helps you to develop your reflexes, because at that point in time, you're looking at what you're looking at is your reflexes. Your reflexes should be right.
So the last question is, there are certain issues about fewer fellowship slots. Of course, we can't do much about it. Fewer entry-level jobs and lesser salary at starting point. So what do we do? What can AIs do something about these?
What entry-level jobs?
Any thoughts on these?
So I don't know, maybe we can,
Because there was a survey conducted recently by, ophthalmologists from Kerala. So I don't want to name anybody, but the results were very startling in the sense that younger ophthalmologists were very frustrated that they're not getting jobs and they're being paid less.
Yeah, I am aware of that survey, which was done in nearly 1,000, young ophthalmologists, and more than 75% of these younger lot had expressed dissatisfaction about, especially about the cuts.
I think this was a pan-India survey, isn't it? Not confined to one state.
No, it was a pan-India.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Lalit Verma sir was really instrumental. He was the one who coaxed them to do this survey.
No, the reason was because initially this gentleman presented data of 40 people. So I told him that 40 is hardly a number. Why don't you do a survey? Because I was aware of a lot of surveys which Namrata, Santosh, they keep carrying on. So it will take 1 week or 2 weeks, but you will have a good data. So you see, cutting salary is a negative kind of vibe. So it does. It was expected also. You see, seniors can take a cut, they can absorb that, and their needs are also less. But at a junior level, I think this should not be done.
The thought process that comes out through the survey is that while most of the institutes made up for the loss during lockdown times by the end of their financial year, yet they were not compensated. Do you think that's the right approach? They should. What do you feel, sir?
You see, I would go to the other extent that you see, for 1 or 2 months salary should not be deducted. If the lockdown and other things get prolonged, then you can at best deduct, say, maybe some percentage of senior level people, but they can absorb it. You see, let's cut the artificial, this figure can be say around 50,000 or whatever. So junior to that you should not cut, because they are budding stage and they lose their morale and family, all these issues, spouse issues ho jata. So but senior levels can do absorb. And other thing is, whensoever the organization covers up, then I think they should pay back, not if not completely, then maybe in a graded way, like 10-20% every month. They can keep increasing till the time the equation is set. So that should be the way of meeting this demand.
But just one thing, if I look at what I was earning as an intern many years back when I passed out of JIPMA, the salary was 500, 550, 600 rupees to what it is now. There's been a massive jump. But let's look at it. Whenever you get people who are differentially trained, some people are very good while others are not as good, but everybody expects extremely high salary. That becomes a little difficult at times. For a person coming from a good institution would certainly require a higher salary. But then many of the youngsters, nothing against anybody, but I think we should have some sort of it's very difficult to sometimes give those salary as far as when you're working in a private institution, when you should also be able to, the youngster should be able to deliver that much back to the institute.
I thought we were talking about people who are already working, their salary is getting cut.
Acha, okay. I thought
if they are already working, then if you are employing that, I agree. It has to be based on their talent and how much do they deliver and what difference do they make to your organization. That's okay. But people already working, if they are subject to cuts, then it sends a negative.
Yeah, I think your policy of below a particular level, no cuts is an appropriate policy.
And then repay. What Santosh was saying was, whenever you are in a green, then you can consider, the organization can consider repaying, if not the immediate in one go, but say 10-20% every year, provided you have made up the loss and are doing well.
Just a small question which I want to ask all of you. if the organizations have started doing well and your organization is doing well, would you give increments in this year?
Say it again. Would you give?
Would you give, so supposing somebody is to get a 10% increment year on year, would you give the 10% increment, or would you say because this COVID times, no increment? We will give you full salary, but increment is a question which we may not give you.
No, during tough times, obviously you stop the increment. But if you have made up and you are consistently doing well, then you should come back. You see, there are a lot of organizations which I know who have given increments also.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, yes, sir.
Sorry. One line I will say.
Yes.
It all depends on the absorbing power also. You see, I'm telling you, it all depends on the size of the organization and their ability to absorb. And this will send a positive vibe to all the workers. You see, they will start praising, and maybe they will work harder because they know that we have been obliged also.
See, this is actually not only in ophthalmology. I mean, I am aware of many young surgeons, or especially like cardiologists or nephrologists. They had joined before COVID 4 to 5 lakh salary, and they're very well. And then they got a posh car, a mansion, and they are into huge. Now they are out of job. They are not getting the salary. They're getting only cuts from the patient that they see, and now they are taking COVID duties. So once upon a time, maybe 2 years back or 3 years back, they were very well-known names, promising youngsters. But right now they're looking for jobs in COVID hospitals. So it is affecting not only ophthalmology, it is affecting the bigger corporate hospitals, multi-specialty hospitals, and it is quite pitiable to see them that way.
So Rashmin, can you comment about this? Is e-learning the new normal? Even after COVID goes away, are we going to stick to e-learning or evolve some hybrid model where both didactic, offline and online are taught simultaneously in a very homogeneous way?
I think we have discussed it. Both of us have discussed this maybe a decade before COVID struck, and I think I'm quite convinced that e-learning.
I think you should tell that story, Rashmin, that how we started and failed e-learning experiment.
Yeah. I think, and that was so amazing that maybe it was more than 10 years ago when I was still at SN and Santosh was still at LVP, and we met at one of I think Ahmedabad AIOS, one of the AIOS is where we met. And the idea sprung that we should have a joint grand round. So basically, just imagine the whole faculty of LVP and at SN discussing, dissecting a case, one PG presenting from one institution and all the faculty dissecting it as a group. And there was so much of knowledge which was discussed in 2 or 3 of those grand rounds which took place. So it tells us that, it has a great potential. And I think it is a new normal. Everybody has realized the importance of it, the implications of it. And I think it's here to stay.
Okay, so you anticipate that there would be a combination of e-learning and the conventional teaching.
Conventional for skill transfer. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So e-learning is here to stay because I think it's very convenient for everybody, especially deferred e-learning. If you're not live, you can always go back and see. Whereas classroom teaching is the formal way of educating anyway. So I think we would get used to the new normal. With that note, I think if you have any ending comments, any of you can do that. Otherwise, we are right on time. 7:58. We are supposed to finish at 8 o'clock.
I think
a wonderful session.
a very nice session, and it has given us so many insights into the future of fellowship training and teaching. Very useful.
Yeah, and it's informal and impromptu.
And I think e-learning, sir, is more affordable. Saving so much on travel, accommodation. I think we can get higher quality training. Everything that is not necessarily hands-on. You probably just want to show some videos, and all that is still possible. So I think we have saved so much in the last 1 year by having e-learning. I think it's going to be a chunk. Now everybody's used to it. Initially that resistance was there. Now they realize it's the best option that they have. So everybody is going to be more open to it. So I think
I would probably call it a great equalizer.
Yeah,
that's true. it's like, between different institutions of different caliber, when e-learning provides them all over the country a great equalizer.
I have a question for all of you actually. Like most of these webinars that AIS conducts and many of the societies conduct, they don't have registration fees. On the other hand, there are some institutes where invariably there will be registration fees, and I mean I've heard some loose discussion amongst the attendees. The pros and cons. So what do people feel? It should be made free, or you should always have a registration fee for webinars?
That's a policy decision, I think, which the institute or the teaching institution has to take. And because there's so much of material which is freely available, I don't know how many people are actually attending the ones which are done by the institute. I think the new normal is that I just want to give just one small example. I was reviewing a paper which has come where actually they have done keratoprosthesis. I'm just saying how this can be even translated into surgical skill training. They have done one keratoprosthesis in Toronto, Canada, after getting it onto a 3-dimensional camera and all the steps which were being mentored live from a surgeon in Israel.
Correct.
So it has gone to that level.
Yeah,
So-
that is e-mentoring and telementoring is
Yeah,
always there.
yeah.
If somebody is operating on a surgery which is not done in a remote area, you can always telementor.
Yeah. So it was a pleasure to review that paper, but I mean, of course, like you said, this is going to be the new normal.
Any concluding remarks from Lalit sir? Since he's going to be the president in a year.
No, Santosh, all the points you have raised are very, very valid. What I would suggest is that, you see, these young souls need to be counseled properly. And like Rajesh also making one point, till the time, you see, you have access to simulators. Even Namrata was telling that article survey, they can, learn microscopic utilization. And AIS should play a lead role. You see, I had long discussions with Namrata over this, that one floor is available and we can approach companies and we can make a teacher, mentor, mentee kind of program that every week we, have this kind of training in at the center. And we have rooms there also. And other thing which I had hinted was that leadership of AIS should communicate, should give them some kind of confidence that we are with you. So this is important, that we are with you, and maybe the right to authorities who matter about their possibility of increasing time, which all of us know, or how to, like very valid question, or how to increase the time. So this has to be done. Ultimately, ophthalmology is a surgery. Ultimately, they have to be confident in doing anything before they come out and start practicing on patients and starting earning their name or fame. Otherwise, you see, like you were talking about mass lecturing and all, and Chaitra said her preferred is in small groups. The reason is we want teaching, we want skill development. We don't want vomiting from one side and you have done your job and goes away. So these 3-4 aspects need to be stressed, and we should tell our chairman scientific committee also. So like in DOS, I had started one program, DOST. So DOST was, DOST teaching, but it meant a friend. DOST means Hindi means friend. So I used to give one this thing. One lecture. So one lecture and give 1 hour to that consultant to teach, start from basics. So I had Harsh Kumar, Pradeep Sharma. So lecturing only on basics. And you see the attendance was 265 average, which we did at that time, a couple of years back when I was secretary. So what I'm saying is...
You were president at that time, sir. I was secretary, you were president.
Achha,
it was your idea.
What I'm saying is, teaching is different, lecturing is different. So thrust should be on teaching, skill development, rather than unilateral, teaching and vomiting.
So, Dr. Lalit, there's a small something which you brought up. I do not know if your presidency, this can be taken forward, is to make a logbook in all the residencies mandatory.
I said that. I said to some.
Yeah. So
I'm a firm believer in logbook.
Made mandatory.
Yeah.
And you should have standard. Everybody should have done 10 of this, 10 of this, or whatever numbers we come
Santosh
across.
would remember he made a entire curriculum which still is lying in AIUS office. It's a huge curriculum which Santosh had helped me in designing that, and there are pages in that logbook that so many surgeries have to be done. In fact, at Center for Sight, believe me, all our fellows, they do get signed whenever they do a procedure or this thing, and we are supposed to sign that, and that is mandatory, irrespective of how much talent you already have or don't. But we, as a minimum, a common minimum kind of program.
See, like US fellowships have a mandatory logbook.
With all due to respect, I guess respected all the doctors. We have just like concluded the whole time, and I hope even you know about it. So I guess we must sum it up within the next 30 seconds. Hope you don't mind it.
Thank you all. Thank you, Santosh.
Thank you, everyone.
We agree and respect time. And
Thank you, Tanvi.
Chaitra wants to say something.
Thank you. No, I just said
thank you.
it was
Bye-bye.
I just wanted to ask Dr. Roop's opinion on, I mean, what does he think? It should be paid or non-paid? The question that he asked us.
Honestly speaking, I'm not really sure what exactly is done.
Uh-huh.
And as you say, it is not in my hands. And so whatever educational programs that we conduct in our center, it is free.
If it is in my hand, I would. If it is my hand, I would always ask it to pay. Whatever amount, minimum amount, has to be.
In fact,
in any case, thanks Tanvi and Rolika for taking time and making us aware of all these things. Hats off to Santosh for he must have given all the directions. I know that. And Santosh, wonderful program as usual. And Aishala, you have been doing
really great. Thank you for asking us to be a part, Santosh.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to all the moderators and the panelists to be the part of this session. And thank you all for being the part of 79th conference of AIOC. So we would conclude on this call. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanvi. You've been trained so well.
Thank you, Rolika. I mean, you just really helped me so much during the whole session, as well as Dr. Santosh for coordinating it really very smoothly. Thank you so much, Dr. Everyone else who contributed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the compliments, Tanvi.